This review was a request by Patreon founder Michael Foy. Thank you for supporting my show, Michael. This is for you. Today we shall take a critical look at 1977's Japanese horror comedy produced by Toho, which you might know better for... The film in question is Nobuhiko Obayashi's English titled House. Please give a warm welcome to this lovely title card. Oh, I'm sorry, I mispronounced it. It's House! So to talk about the premise and history of House, we must first go back in time a couple of years to reacquaint ourselves with a little-known blockbuster hit that some of you might have heard of. To say that Jaws was a commercial success would be like stating that Rusev's treatment in the WWE is utterly unfair. It knocks you on the head unconscious for how much obvious of a statement that is. Naturally, Steven Spielberg's money-printing summer executioner's worldwide spread did in fact spread itself to the land of the rising creepy hairdo. Specifically, it inspired Toho to try and cash in on the film's monetary upbringing. You know, like Dino De Laurentiis and pretty much everyone else in the world was trying to do at the time. The company approached Obayashi, a then screenwriter and small-time experimental film director, with the proposition to write a script for a film similar to Jaws. Inspired by the inputs and childhood 3 years of his daughter Chigumi, whose many ideas would end up in the finished product, Nobuhiko eventually came up with the finished screenplay, which was immediately greenlit by Toho and failed to find a director. Apparently, there was a lingering fear among possible candidates that working on this project might be a career suicide. I can't imagine why. The script was stuck in production hell for 2 years until Obayashi decided to put himself in the directorial shoes. Thus, House became his first feature-length film and, surprisingly, a huge commercial hit, albeit initially shunned by critics. And this is how it looked. Yes, that's quite a leap from a human-eating shark movie. Although, to be fair, both House and Jaws share a similar premise. In the latter, unwitting beach dwellers get eaten by a ferocious avatar of animal fury. In the former, a group of high school girls gets eaten by a house. It's one of those films. A group of hapless high school girls with interesting names spend their vacation at one of the teenagers' seemingly estranged aunt's place. It's just too bad said lovely mansion happens to be haunted, as in Poltergeist on a Sugar Rush kind of haunted. Shenanigans ensue. Shenanigans of the anthropophagus piano variety, that is. It's important to keep in mind when dissecting the seemingly nonsensical premise of such a film, the influence that Obayashi's daughter had in the genesis of the original script. As mentioned before, this diegesis intentionally adopts a surreal presentation in order to grant itself a deceptive childlike atmosphere, as if its own fictional reality was overtaken by someone's bedtime story, which in turn ends up emphasizing its fictional nature. Every single element is constantly drenched in this decisively dreamscapey style ambience, right out of a little girl's colorful imagination, from the overly fake backgrounds that would make Wes Anderson blush, to the maddeningly wild editing, to the very way the main protagonists are named. Seriously, with names like this, you'd think they would be ready to fight against evil in the name of the moon or something. And naturally, there's the soundtrack, which gets repetitious and annoying real fast, not to mention wholly inappropriate when played over certain key scenes. This delving into the depths of a child's subconscious, including the scary parts, in order to form a world made out of our brightest whims and deepest fears, is also quite obviously serving as a meta-referential tool the director is using to point out the very nature of cinematic storytelling, specifically the creative artifice of it all, the fake yet imaginative construct of a story as it is conveyed to an audience. In a way, you could surmise that whenever we, the audience, watch a film and we get invested in its fictional world, we are like kids being mesmerized by a particularly good bedtime story. That would probably be the thematic parallel between cinema and childhood fantasies that Obayashi was going for with his very peculiar style of direction, which, while good and all in theory, unfortunately also turned out to be the film's greatest issue. Did I mention the editing yet? Yes, you might see what the problem is. In a word, excess. Excess in the aesthetic presentation, excess in the repetition of the soundtrack, excessive over-editing and overacting, all combined and played out constantly to the point everything becomes overwhelming, then annoying, and finally just plain exhausting. The editing would be the worst offender in that department. As delightfully experimental as it may seem at first, it doesn't take long for it to barge into pure visual nonsense territory and become laughable. Case in point, have you ever seen a transition trying to provide a jump scare? Well, now you have! Aside from the aforementioned metatextual themes about cinema and childhood, House has little to no else to offer in terms of quality storytelling, which is ironic considering its stand on actual storytelling. The main cast is mostly comprised of amateur actresses, and the characters they play are just one-note archetypes that never develop a personality outside of their chosen names. Again, this is part of that old "this is supposed to be like a child's tale" vibe that's carried throughout the film. But that shouldn't be treated as an excuse to write boring and uninteresting characters. That's a line of thought that needs to die. Finally, the tone is all over the place. The over-the-top comedic moments don't mix well with the supposed horrific ones, since there doesn't seem to be a proper transition in between them. Most of the humor comes off as, you guessed it, excessive in its cartoonish nature to be anything more than weird, and not just because of the obvious cultural barrier, trust me on that. And for the most part, the horror elements seem to pop out without a proper atmospheric contextualization or a suspenseful build-up. On that regard, having the villain breaking the fourth wall to wink at the audience does not help. So, with both the comedic and scary elements failing to work together or indeed as separated entities, minus a few ones, the soundtrack becoming obnoxious very quickly and the characters being too one-dimensional to connect with the audience, the element left that holds this film together would be the mind-numbing editing itself. And make no mistake, said editing is the real protagonist here. There isn't a single scene, I would be prone to say a single frame even, that's not persistently imbued in its all-encompassing glory, drowned in its ocean of aesthetic overhauling, every angle, every sequence, every transition buried in its increasingly grating self-celebratory masturbation, hammering the film's themes right into the audience's cranium, over and over and over. I'm going to stop now. But yes, in spite of its successes, its stylistic statements rendered a bit hollow by its lesser substance. House! is indeed an imaginative and colorful art piece. I would personally prefer a messy, misguided but creative film over an equally misguided but utterly lazy alternative. In the end, Obayashi's debuted feature may have its flaws, but it speaks volumes of his editing and scenic abilities. I just wish the film was shorter, in retrospect. I am definitely not visiting Auntie's home again next summer. I mean, she hits people!